Hey guys, in this video we are going to build a real-time chat application with authentication using Django and Tailwind. The result will look something like this, with a really empty front page, a sign-up page, login, a room list page, and then the page for the chat room. I'm going to begin by installing the software we need and then build the chat app piece by piece. In this tutorial we are going to use a virtual environment for the project we are building. So the first thing we need to do is to install virtual environment. You can do this by running this command: pip install virtual env. This might be a little bit different if you have Windows, but I'm not sure. Great, then the next step is to create the virtual environment. You do this by running virtual env and then the name Django chat underscore env, or whatever you want to call it. Then you hit enter and you will see something like this. Then we can activate it by saying source Django chat env bin activate. And then you see that we have the name of the environment here. That means that every time we use pip to install a package now, it will just be installed for this environment. And then we can install Django and channels. Pip install Django and channels and hit enter. This will install the latest version of Django, which is 4.0.1, and then a few dependencies that Django has. Next it will install channels. Channels is something you use to wrap Django's native asynchronous view support, allowing Django project to handle not only HTTP but protocols that require long-running connections too, just like a real-time chat application where we use WebSockets. Perfect. All of the software we need is now installed, so we can continue by creating a Django project and configure it. To create a new project, you just run django-admin start project and then the name, which is in this case will be Django chat, and hit enter. And we can go into it as well. I also want to create a new Django app where we're going to create or have the main views like the login page, the front page and similar. And this will be called core. So Python manage.py start app core. And even though we have created this app now, Django doesn't know that it exists. So we need to register in the list of apps. So we can open this project in Visual Studio Code or the editor you like. Okay, so now I have it here, and then I have the core app which we just created. So if I open up Django chat and find settings.py, we have a list of installed apps. We can add core to this list. And since we're already here, we can also add channels as well, which is the library we installed. Channels. Great. The installation and configuration is now finished and we can start building the chat application. So we're going to begin with the front page. The front page will be located in the core app. So let's begin by creating a new folder called templates. Django will automatically look for a folder called templates in each of the apps we have. And then in here I want to create one more folder called core, so it's easier to separate the templates folder from each other. And then in here I can create one file called base.html. This will be the base for the whole project, where we have the menu and similar. So we can just begin by adding the doc type and then the HTML tags. Then I just paste in some code for the head. Here we set the char set, the viewport, so it will be responsive, and then the title of the project, and then a script for including Tailwind CSS as the CDN. This cannot be used in production, but we want to use this for development now. And then below here I can add the body, set the class to be BG Teal 600, this is a dark green color, Django. So we can test that this is working now. If we go to the views.py to create a new view here, def front page, and then we pass in the request parameter, and then we say return render request. Then we want to specify which template to use, which in this case is core/base.html. And then we don't need anything more here. Next I want to create a new URLs file here, so we can separate it from the main URLs file. So urls.py. And here I can say from django.urls import path. And then I can import the views from this app from import views. So just include or import the whole file. Then we need to set up the URL patterns, which is a list, and then just path And when this is empty, we want to use views.frontPage. And we can also set the name to be front page, so it's easy to reference other places in the app. And then the last step before we can test this is to import this URLs file into the main URLs file. So to do that, I can at the top here say path. And when this is empty, I want to include core.urls, like that. You can see here that I get an error, and that's because you need to import this up here together with path. So if I save now, everything here should be okay. So I can go to the terminal and say Python manage.py run server to spin up the development server. Okay, I get an error here now. You need to set the ASGI application. This is done inside the settings.py file. So if I just go back to that file, scroll down where I find WSGI application, then I can say this equals Django chat.asgi.application. This file already exists, but we need to configure it a little bit later. So this is for regular pages like the front page, the sign up page and similar, while this is for the chat itself for long running connections. So if I save now, try to run the server again. Yes, now it was working. You can just ignore this for now, I will come back to it. So you can open this in Chrome or your browser. And then you see here that you have a green background with the Django title there. Perfect. Then I just want to add a menu and a little bit more to the body. So if I open up base.html again, just remove this, then I paste in this. It's a nav element with the class flex, and then items center, justify between, then some padding on the sides, paddings on the top and bottom, and then I set this to even darker background color. Then I can close this. And then on the left side, I want the name of the application. This can just be a div. And then in here, a href, which can link to the front page, class, text, XL, so it's a big font, and text white. Django chat. Save. If I now refresh, you'll see that we get the darker menu and then the link or logo for this project. And then on the right side here, I want a button for logging in and signing up. So if I just go back here, and then below here I said div class flex, because this also needs to be a flex container since the buttons has to be next to each other. Items centered, so they are on the same line. Then space -x -4, so it has a little bit space between the two buttons. And we can begin with the login button, a href /login, class text white, hover text gray 200. So the link is white, but when you take the mouse over it, it will be gray. Log in. We can test this. Just refresh, and then you see that we take the mouse over it, you see it a little bit darker. Perfect. Next, it's a sign up button. So below this link, create a new one, a href /sign up, class px5, so it says, so we get some space on the sides of the button, py3, so we get some space over and under, rounded xl, so we get rounded corner, text white, and bg teal 600, so it's the same background color as the body. And then when we hover it, we want to make it a little bit darker, so hover bg teal 700, and we close it and say sign up and save. So if I now refresh, we should get a button here. Great. And then down here I want to add one more div element before we continue. So below the navigation bar, we say div class p-10, so we get a lot of space. So we use this now on mobile, but when we are on desktop, we want to use LG P20. So from large screens and up, we want padding 20, but on mobile phones, we only have padding 10. And then text center, And then in here I want a title. So now this is h1 with the class text 3xl, but on desktop it's 6xl and it's a white title. So you can save now, refresh, and then you see the title there. Perfect. But now everything of this is in the base.html. I want a separate template for the front page which will just extend this. So if I go back here now, create a new file called frontpage.html. Then to extend it, I just add this directive extends core/base.html. And then save and go to the views.py and say frontpage.html. So if I now refresh, everything will look the same. Now it's time to extend the base.html a little bit and change it. To do this, we need to go into base.html. Then up here with the title, we can add a block title, close it, and block. And then down here, you can cut this like that. And here you say block content and block. And if I now refresh, this will be gone. If I go to the front page.html again, then I can say block title and say welcome, close it, and block, and one more for the content. So block content, and then I can paste this in here again, and block, and save. And if I now refresh, you will see welcome up here in the browser, and then this is back. But now this is reusable for example, the login page and similar. In this part of the series, we're going to implement authentication. We can begin by setting up the sign up functionality. For the best security and simpleness, I want to use Django's built-in user creation form. Here we will get a ready form we can use for signing up users and similar. So the only thing we have to think about is telling Django which fields to show and then create a template for rendering the form. So inside the core app, we want to create a new file called forms.py, and then here we need to import two things. First we import the user creation form, and then we import the user database model. Then we can create a new form by saying class sign up form. And we can pass in the user creation form, which tells Django that we're going to use this. And then here we need to add the class meta for options, where we specify which model we want to use, which is the user, and then which fields we want, which is username. We want the password field, password 1, and password 2. And that's everything we need. We still have a few more steps to do. And the next step is to create a view for handling the requests. So inside the views.py, we can begin by importing the form we just created from .forms, import, sign up form. And I can say .forms since we're in the same folder as this file. And we also need to import a login functionality from Django. So from django.contrib .auth import login, and one shortcut from Django which is called redirect, because we want to redirect the user when it's signed in. So then we can create the sign up view, def sign up, pass in the request parameter, and then the first thing we want to check here if the form has been submitted. And to do that we say if request.method equals post, then we know that the form has been clicked, and create a new instance of it by saying form equals sign up form. And then we can pass in the data from the form by saying request.post. And then we just want to check that it's valid, for example that the passwords are matching and that the username doesn't exist. To do that we say if form.isValid, Django will handle everything there for us. And if it is valid, we want to create a new user equals form.save, and then we also have the user now in a variable. And we can use the login function we imported up here to authenticate him. Login, then we use the request and then the user. And then when that's done, we want to redirect the user back to the front page. Return, redirect, front page. And this name just points to the URLs file, and then it finds a view with this name. And then Django will find the path to it automatically. And if it's not a request, if it's not a post request, we would just want to create an empty instance of the sign-up form. So else form equals sign-up form, because then we want to render it on the page. And then we can say return render request core/signup.html, and we also want to pass in the form like that. Great, so then we can import this view into the urls.py file here and say path signup / then we want to use views.signup and set the name to signup. So if I now go back to the browser, then I can click the sign up button, and then we get the template does not exist yet. And that is the next step. Create the template for the sign up page. Before I continue, I just want to say thanks to my Patreons. If you too want to support me, you will find a link to my Patreon in the description below. And just like we created the front page, we can copy a little bit of this, create a new file, and save it as signup.html. The title up here should of course be sign up, and then we can just close this just to see that it's working. So if I refresh now, the sign up page should load, and you can see up here that the title is set. You can also copy the title from the front page, just paste it in here and say sign up instead. And then below the title we want to show the form. So below here is a form, method is post, action should go to the same page which we are on. And then if we are on desktop, the width should be set to 1/4 of the screen and not fill out the whole screen. And set some padding on the sides and MX auto so it's on the middle of the screen. And since this is a post request, we also need a CSRF token here for security. And then below here we want a field for showing the username. So this is just a simple div element with class mb5, which adds some spacing below, and then a white label which says username, and then input type text, name, username, which is the same as in the form. We want this to fill out this element, get some margin top up to this label, add some spacings inside, and then that the rounded corner should be set. And then below here we want fields for the passwords. So it's 2 divs with some spacings below, and then the labels, and then we just use the input type password so it's secure, and then we use password 1 and password 2. The classes are the same as the username. So we can save this now just to see that it's working. Great. You see it fills out 1/4 of the screen, and then we have the fields for signing up the user. If there are any errors, I want to show them below here and before we show the submit button. Django gives this automatically for us if there are any errors. We just want to check this by saying if form.errors, and then we can loop through each of the fields. So for field in form, we'll loop through the fields from the forms.py file, this list, and then it will check if there are errors in one of them. And if it is, we add the div, which is red around the corner, so it's easy to see that this is an error. And then below this check, we have the submit button. Bless you. So this is a regular button with some spacings, rounded corner, white text, and then a green background, and it's a little bit lighter when we hover it. So if you save now, refresh, you will see the complete sign up form. Perfect. So now we should be able to sign up a user, code with Stein, and then a password, like that. No such table auth user. and that's because we haven't run the migration scripts yet. So if I stop the web server here now, I say Python manage.py make migrations, and also Python manage.py migrate. Great, so now the tables should be initialized. And if I now run the server again, and now the warning that was here is also gone. So now I can try to sign up the user again. Submit. Great, so now we're redirected to the front page, which means that the sign up was working. Great. So now I can set this task to done, and then the next step is to create the functionality for logging out a user. Django has built-in functionality for this, and I want to use this. So if I go to the urls.py inside the core folder, there, I can import a thing from Django. So above here, from django.contrib.auth, import views as auth views. So I import this as views, but I rename it auth views so it's easier to separate from this views. And then below the sign up here, I can say path log out slash, and then here I want to say auth views dot logout view dot s view. Then Django will have everything here for us. And we can set the name to log out, so it's easy to specify this in the navigation bar, and save. And then the next step now is to show the logout button in the menu instead of login / sign out. So go back to base.html, and then above here I can say or check that if the user is authenticated by saying if request dot user that is authenticated. Then we want to show that, and if not, that means that we are not logged in, and we can show these two buttons instead. And if. So here I want a link to the rooms page where the list of rooms will be listed. Paste it like that, so it just goes directly to /rooms, and this is the same as the login link, as you can see here. And also make a copy of this button and say log out instead. Log out. So if I now save this, go back and refresh, you will see up here now that you see the rooms link and the logout button. Perfect. But before we try this button, I just want to make sure that we are redirected to the correct pages when we log out. And so if we go back to settings.py, then we can specify this here. So here or anywhere else in this file, we can say logout redirect URL equals /. So then we will be redirected to the front page. We can also specify the login redirect URL equals /rooms. So this is where you will be automatically redirected when you logged in. And login URL equals /login, like that. So if you try to visit a page where you're not authenticated, you will be redirected to this page. So then I can refresh, and I can click log out. So then I was logged out, but I was redirected to the wrong page. And the reason why I was not logged out now is because I made a little error in the base.html file. If I go back here, you see that this still shows sign up, but it should say log out. So then I can refresh again. Then if I now click log out, I was redirected to the front page. So now we can set this task as well to done and go to the last task, which is login functionality. And Django also has functionality for this, which we are going to use. So inside the urls.py file, here we can add this above the logout, so path login / auth views.loginview.sview. And inside here now we can specify where we want the template to be located. And to do that we say template name equals core/login.html. Now we can set the name for this, name equals login. Sorry, I was missing an S there. So save. So then the next step now is to create this template, which will be very similar to the sign up page. So I can just make a copy of this and then create a new file, save it as login.html. So if I now just paste this template here, scroll up, I want to rename this to login and login here as well. And Django now expects a username and a password, but we don't want to repeat the password for logging in, and this can be renamed to just password. And the way we show errors is also just the same as in the sign up page, and we can rename the title to or button to log in and save. So if I now go to the browser and say refresh, then I can click the login button, then you will see the new login page. I can try to log in with the user I created. Great, I was now redirected to the rooms page, which doesn't exist yet. So I'm going to create rooms, show list of rooms, and then create consumers for joining a chat. So the first thing we can do is to create a new app for the rooms. So if you go to the command line and stop the web server, we can create a new app by saying Python manage.py start app room. Great, and just like we added core to the list of installed apps, we need now to add room to the list as well. So we can go back to the editor and find settings.py. In here we have the installed apps, and then at the bottom of the list we can add room. Next step is to create a database model. A database model is where we describe to Django what information we want to store in the database. So if I find the room app here, and then the file called models.py, then we can create a new model for the room by saying class room, and then we pass in models.model. And I want one field for the name and one for the slug. So the name is a normal char field with a max length of 255, and then the slug field is a much better word for using in the URL than the name. And this is also had to be unique, so we get error if you try to create two similar rooms. So now that we have the database model for the rooms, we need to update the database. So we need to go back to the command line again and say Python manage.py make migrations to create the migrations scripts. Sorry, I forgot to save the file. So try it again. And now you see here that we want to create a new model called room. And then to run the migration script, we need to run Python manage.py migrate. So now the script that was created here was executed. So now the database should be updated and we should have a table for the rooms in the database. So then I can go to the to-do list and set the first task to done. Next step then is to create a super user so you can log into the admin interface and create rooms. So one more time we need to go back to the command line and say Python manage.py create super user and hit enter. So then you can just create with whatever username you want. Great, so now the super user was created successfully. Next we can run the server again by running Python manage.py run server. Now I have it running here in the browser. I want to open up one more browser so I can log into the admin interface without interrupting the user that I have here. So if I open up Firefox and then go to this address /admin, then I can log in with the admin user I just created. And here we have possibility to create users and groups, but we don't need to do that right now. Then I want to make it possible to show the rooms here, so we can create rooms for the chat application. So if I go back to the studio code and then into admin.py, we need to register the model here. First we import it by saying from.models import room, and then just admin.site.register, then we pass in the model there and save. So if I go back now and refresh, you'll see that the rooms appeared here. Perfect. So let's go ahead and create a few rooms. Let's say work, and then the slug, and then one more for hobby, and save. So now we have two rooms for our chat application. Great. So then I can go to the to-do list again and set this to done. And then I want to make it possible to show a list of rooms here in the application when I go to /rooms. So the first thing I want to do then is to create a view for getting the rooms from the database. So here inside the views.py, I can begin by importing the database model from .models import room. And then I also want to make sure that the user is authenticated to access this. And to do that, we need to use a decorator called @login required. And then we need to import this as well from Django. So here above this import we say from django.contrib.auth.decorators import login required. So if you try to go to this page without being authenticated, you will be redirected to the login page. Now you can create the view by saying def rooms. Then we pass in the request. And then we can get all of the rooms from the database by saying rooms equals room.objects.all. And then we need to render the view by saying return render. So we use the function which is imported up here. You can pass in the request. And then we need to specify the template, which is room/rooms.html. Now we need to also pass in the rooms, so these are available in the front end. And save. So that's the view for now. Next, I want to create the template for listing the different rooms. So I can begin by creating a new folder here called templates. And then in there, a new folder called room. And then we can create this template, which is called rooms.html, like that. So here I can make a copy of one of the other templates because I want to extend the base template and similar. So if I just copy all of this in the front page.html, like that, now we can rename the title to rooms and also the title here to rooms. So then we have everything we need there to test this. I just want to create a new urls.py file for the rooms, so we keep things as clean as possible. So urls.py. And here I want to import path from Django, from django.urls import path, which is a function. And then from .import views, so I just import all of the views from this file. Then we need to set up the URL patterns. So when we go to just this empty path, we need to use the views.rooms view and specify the name to be rooms. So I have it empty here because I want to specify rooms as the prefix in the main URLs file. So if I scroll up and find the URLs py file here, I can say path rooms / so all the URLs that begins with rooms will be redirected in here. That's why this can be empty. So then we can say include room.urls, which is the file we just created, and save. So now I think I can go back to the browser, refresh, and now we'll see that the title is up here and also the title for the page we are on. Great. So then we just need to loop through the rooms here and show a link so we can join them later. So if we go back to the template and then below this div, I want to create a new div for listing the rooms. So this should fill out the whole screen. I want it to be flex, and if the rooms fills out the screen, they should wrap to the new line. And I set items centered so they are next to each other and on the same height. And then in here we can say for room in rooms. So then we loop through the variable we got and for. And then one more div for the actual room. So for mobile, I want this to fill out the whole screen, but if we are on desktop, it should only fill out 1/4 of the screen. Then add some padding on the sides and padding on the tops, or over and below the content. And then in here, I want one more div so we can have it white and some shadow. So I specify that there is padding all over this box. the background to be white and there's a shadow around it, and the corners should be rounded, and the text for the box should be centered on the screen or inside the box. And then we have the title for the room, which is set the margin bottom 5, so we get some spacings below this title down to the join button. It should be 2XL font size and it's semi-bold. Now we can use this variable to show the title, so room.name. And then below here I want a button for joining the chat. So I set the href to be empty for now, and then I create the button and add some spacings to it. I set it to be block so the margin will work as expected. I add a rounded corner, set the text to be white, and then the button to be BG Teal 600, and when you hover it, it goes a little bit darker. So now we can save this, go back to the browser and refresh, and now we can see the workroom and the hobby and the button for joining them. Perfect. So then I can go back to the to-do list, set this task to done, and then I need to create a new room detail view so we can click the join button and go into it. So I can go back to the views.py and I can copy this decorator, and then below here I say def room, we pass in the request parameter, and here we also need the slug for finding the room in the database. And then we can get the room from the database by saying room equals room.objects.get, where slug equals slug. And we will pass this in from the URL spy in a second. And then I can also make a copy of this so I don't have to write all of it. So we want to specify the room template, and we need to pass in the room instead of the rooms, and save. Great. So then I can continue by creating the template. So I can just copy this template again, create a new file, and save it as room.html. And I can remove this one because we don't need the list of rooms. And here I want to show the name of the room we are on, so room.name. And the same thing with the page title here. So now we can save this and continue by importing it here to the paths. So I say path, and then we want to expect here a slug called slug. So this is the type of parameter, and this is the name, which is also the same as here. Then we need to add a slash at the end there and say views.room, and the name of this should also be room. And save. So then I want to make it possible to click this join button so we can go into that. So we can use a parameter or a directive from Django called URL. And then we specify room, which points to this name here. And then we can just specify the slug by saying room.slug and save. So if I now go back to the browser and refresh, these buttons should be able to be clicked. So click it, and then you see work here and work up in the browser. Great. So now I want to build the HTML for the chat. It's just hard coded for now, but then we see what everything will look like when it's finished. So go back here and find the room.html. Below here I want to create a wrapper for the messages, and then below there a wrapper for the form. So I can begin with the view with the messages. And this, when you're on desktop, should fill out half of the screen, and set the MX4 so we get some margins on the sides for the mobile version. And when you're on desktop, I want it to be centered on the screen. I also set some paddings above and below the content and also on the sides. The background should be white and have rounded corners. And then in here, I create a new div with the class text message, chat messages. And I set space Y3 so we get spacings between the chat messages inside here. I also set ID chat messages so we can reference this here from the JavaScript later. And then I have some code for each of the messages, which will look like this. It's a div with paddings all around inside of the content, the BG grade 200, and also rounded corners. And I have a paragraph for the username, which is set to semi-bold, so it's a little bit separated from the content. So we can try to add a few of these. save. So if I now go back and refresh, you'll see this white div we created and then a few messages inside there. Next step then is to add a form below here for submitting the messages. So here we have the same type of div as we have up here, which is a white one with rounded corners and similar. And then in here we add the form by saying form method post. Action should go to the same page we are on. And then class flex, so we can have the input button next to the input field. Don't need these, I think, because we're going to use JavaScript for submitting it, but I like to add it anyway. So then in here we want one input field for the content. So this is input type text, then the name is set to content, and then class flex1, so it fills out most of this form with a margin right 3, so it has some spacings on the right side next to the button. Set a placeholder to your message, so we know that this is where you write your message. And then the ID, so we can also reference this from the JavaScript. And then we also have a button with the class px5 and py3, so we get some spacings inside it. Set the rounded corners, text white, and then typical green background and hover effect. We also need the ID here, so we can use this or reference it from the JavaScript. Now we can save this, refresh, we can see what it looks like. So here you have the input field and then the submit button. Great. So then we can go to the to-do list again, set this task to done. And then we're going to proceed to the next task, which is creating a consumer. A consumer helps us using WebSockets, so we can handle connections, disconnection, receiving and sending messages and similar. So it's a typical Python script. And the first thing we can do then is to go to settings.py, because we need to set up the channel layers here. So we can go below here and set channel layers equals, and then object. Set the default layer, also a dictionary, and then the backend we are going to use. I'm just going to use an in-memory channel layer for this tutorial. So channels.layers.in-memory channel layer. You can use Redis and similar, which you have to use if you're going to use this in production. So for now, all of the messages that are sent will just be stored in the memory of the server. So if you shut it off, they will be lost forever. Great. So then inside the room folder, we can create one more file called consumers.py. And then we need to import a few things. We can begin by importing JSON, because we're going to use that later. So import JSON. And then we're going to import the class we're going to use for creating a consumer. And I want to import sync to async, which we're also going to use later. This is for storing things in the database inside the asynchronous view. So then we can create a consumer by saying class chat consumer. Now we can pass in the async WebSocket consumer. And the first thing we want to handle here is the connection. So we can create an asynchronous view by saying async def connect. So each time you try to connect to this, you will go into this function. And then based on the URL we are trying to connect to, we want to get the room name from there. I'm going to show you this in the JavaScript later. And we also need to set up something called a group name. This is just chat or prefix this with the room name. And then we can use this to join it by saying await self.channel layer .group add, and then we pass in self.room name and self.group name. So now we can join this. So when this is done, we want to proceed to the next task, which is self.accept. And then we are authenticated and connected to the server. And we also need a disconnect function. So async def disconnect, pass in self, so we are using the class. And then to leave, we just say await self.disconnect channel layer dot group discard, and then we just pass in these two here. Sorry, this was supposed to be self.group name, and then down below here self.channel name. We haven't specified this here because channels fixes this automatically for us. So I can copy these two and paste it down here. So now we have the possibility to connect and disconnect to the chat server. And just like we have a file called urls.py for our different pages, we want a similar file for the WebSockets. So inside the Room app, we need to create one more file called routing.py. And then we can use the path function here as well. So from Django.urls import path. And then we need to import the consumer we created. So from import consumers. Now we can set up the patterns, which here will be called WebSocket underscore URL patterns equals, and then a list. Now we say path WS, which stands for WebSocket slash string or slug, but we use string here, room name, like that. And then we need to specify consumers dot chat consumer as ASGI and save. So now this file should be finished, and we already have a file called ASGI in the main application here, but we need to change this a little bit. So we can remove this comment, and then we need to import a few things from channels. So below this Django import here, I want to import auth middleware stack, so we can use authentication here. And also from the router, we want to import protocol type router and URL router. And we need to import the routing file we just created, this one. So import room.routing. And then this can just be like it is, so Django is set up in this file. And this can be replaced with protocol type router, which comes from channels. And then HTTP get ASGI application. And also the WebSocket needs to be specified here, WebSocket. And here we want to add the auth middleware stack. And in here we create a new instance of this URL router. And in there is a room.routing.websocket URL patterns, which points to this function here. Great. So now everything in the backend should be finished. Don't have any errors here. So then we can go to the to-do list and set the task to done. And then we want to make it possible to join the chat using WebSockets. The first thing we need to do then is to open up the base.html file. And then below the content, we want to create one more block for adding JavaScript. So block scripts and save. And we can go and find the room.html file and create a block here as well. So block scripts. Then we use the end block function. And then here we add the script tag. And then const chat socket equals new web socket. This is built into all browsers. Now we need to specify the address for connection. So ws:// plus window.location.host. This is the URL. Plus /ws, which is the prefix we added in the routing file. Plus the room name. And then one more plus to add a slash at the end. I will get this very soon. So now we have a new chat socket connection, then we want to use it by saying chat socket.onMessage equals function, pass in the event, and then here we can say console.log on message, just so we know that this function was triggered. And also close, or we want to also listen to on close if the server stops or similar. So chat socket.on close. We can copy this and just say on close in the log instead. And then we want to get the room name, which is also the one which is used up here. To do that as best as possible, we need to add it here. Room.slug, because we want the slug. Pass it into JSON script, which is a filter we get from Django. JSON room name. And then we want to get this from down here by saying const room name equals json.parse. So we get this element and parse the content. Document.get element by ID. And the ID is JSON room name. And say .text content, because we want the content of this script tag. So if we now save, go back to the browser, just open up the inspector, refresh. Then I got an error here. So if I go to the command line, you can see here that the chat consumer has no attribute called accept. That's because it's a typo. So if I go back to the consumers.py, try to find this typo. Here we want to say self.accept instead. So now everything is restarted, and when I refresh, nothing stands there. And if I go to the command line, you will see here that the WebSocket is handshaking. That means that it's checking that everything is okay. And then after it says WebSocket connect. So now this is connected to the backend using WebSockets. So the first task is to make it possible to send messages. So we can begin by going to room.html, and then we need to make it possible to get the username down here. So we can create one more directive from Django here called request.user.username. Oops, should be lowercase u. Now we can pass it into one of these. Just rename this to JSON username. Now we can also make a copy of this and replace here with username, and then replace room name with username here as well. And then the next step is to send the messages from this place. And to do that, we can listen for click on this submit button. So down here below these, just add a comment for separation. Then we can say document.query selector. And here we can find the chat message submit. Oops, submit. And say on click. So we listen to the on click event. And we create a new function where we pass in the event like that. And then the first thing we can do there is to get the message content from this input field. So we create a new variable message input DOM. This is the element itself because we need that to reset it afterwards. Now we can get the message by saying const message equals, now just say message input DOM dot value. And then we need to send this using the chat socket. So chat socket dot send. And now we can stringify this using JSON. JSON.stringify, because then it's easier to use in the backend. So I create a new object like that. And what we want to send here is the message. And then the username, which we get up here. I want to use lowercase here. And I also want the room name. Like that. So now this should be sent to the backend. And when that's done, we can reset this field by saying message input dom.value equals empty value and save. Then we also want to make it possible to receive the message here, because when this is done, it's just sent to the backend, but we can also listen to this here when we get it back from the server. Then first we create a new object called JSON where we parse the data we get from the server. Now you can check if this message has been filled out or if there is anything wrong by saying if data.message, then we know that there is a message from the server. If not, we can show an alert message. Alert, the message was empty. And if it's not empty, we want to append it to the list of messages in here. So I can copy one of these objects here, or elements, and paste it in here. And then I create a new variable called let HTML equals, with this line, and then HTML plus equals. Now we used this to paste in or show the user here by saying data.username. And this is also the same you will get when we get messages for everyone else. That's why you need to use the username from the object and not your username. Now we can close the paragraph like that. And then also here HTML plus equals. And then we show the message instead of this hard-coded message. So plus data.message, and then we close the paragraph element like that. And when that's done, I want to insert it into the chat messages element. Sorry, I need to add this /div here like that. And to append it to the HTML inside there, we can just use the query selector to get this ID, which is this one. And then we just say inner HTML plus this HTML we generated here. So now everything in the front end should be okay, but we still need to do a few things in the back end, because we need to make it possible to receive the message there and broadcast it to the whole channel. So if I go back to the consumers.py file, below the disconnect we can create a new async function. So async def receive, pass in self and text data. And then text data is the JSON string that we created. And then we need to use JSON, which we have imported at the top there, to create a JSON object for us. Data equals JSON.loads text data. So now we have a data object we can use here. And from this we can get the message, the username, and the room. Message equals data. Then we get the property by saying this and pass in message there. You can use the same thing for username and room. So username and room like that. And then we can send it to the group by saying await self.channel underscore layer group send, and then in here we want to send it to self.group my room group name, and the object we want to send is type chat message. This will be used later here in the backend, and the message we want to send message and the username and the room. So just copy these two, copy and paste, and then the same with the room. So now this will receive the message from the front end, and then this will take it further and send it out. Then we need to create a new method called chat message, which will be called. So async def chat message, pass in self and event. And the event will contain these three variables. So then I can copy this again and just paste it in here. And instead of saying data message, we say event message like this. So now we have it here, and we can use it to send it to the room. And we send it by saying await self.send and text data equals json.dumps. So now we convert it again to JSON and not an object or dictionary. And the information we want to send is the message, the username, And we can also send the room just so it's there. And save. So now we should be able to test this. So there are no errors in the console. So I can go here, join a room. Then I can open up the inspector. Try to send a message. Hello. Submit. Okay, I got the CSRF token error. And the reason for that is that if I go back here again now and into room.html, then here when we send this, or this is submitted, I should say e.prevent default, so it's not submitted. It's handled here, and then return false at the end. And we can save and try again. Hello, submit, and now it was appended there. Perfect. So the problem now is that if I refresh, this message is gone because it just lives in the memory of the server. So that is the next step. Store the messages in the database. And I also want to remove these hard-coded messages. So if I go back here, I can scroll up and I can find them here. Just remove it like this. So then if I now find the to-do list, I can set this task to done.
Before I continue, I just want to say thanks to my Patreons. If you too want to support me, you will find a link to my Patreon in the description below.
And then I want to make it possible to store the messages in the database. So if I open up room/models.py, we can create a new database models for the messages. Class message. And I want to pass in the models.model. Like that. And then the first thing I need is a reference to the room, this model here. So room equals models.foreign key. Pass in room here. And set the related name to messages, so it's easy to get them later. And if we delete a room, I also want to delete the messages. So on delete models.cascade. And I want the same type of reference to the user who has created this message. So user, then we pass in the user object instead of the room. And then also need to import this. So from django.contrib.auth.models import user. So now we have the user database model as well. And I want one field for the content. So content equals models.text field. And when it was added, date added equals models.datetime field. And this can be set to auto now add equals true, so it's added automatically when we save this in the database. And we can also set the ordering, so we don't have to think about that later. So class meta ordering equals, create a tuple and say date added. And remember to add this comma here and save. So then I can update the database by saying python manage.py make migrations and also the migrate script. Great. So then I can run the server again. So if I then open up views.py in the room app, here where we get the room, I also want to get the messages. And to get them, I can say messages equals message dot objects dot filter room equals room, so we get all of the messages connected to this room, but I only want the 25 first, so add this slice here. So you can see here that this was automatically imported as well. And then to make the messages available, I need to append it to the context down here, like that. So then I can just go back to room.html and loop through them in here. For message in messages and for, then I can make a copy of the HTML from down here, like that. Just remove this and this, div it to the next line. Just do some cleaning. And here I can use message.user.username, since we have access to this object. And instead of saying data.message, we say message.content and save. Great. So then I can just refresh to see that everything is working. There are no errors and no messages. So then I just need to fix a few things in the backend and everything here should be working. So if I go back to the consumer, then I can import the models here from .models import message and room, because I need both of them. And I also need to import the Django user. So from django.contrib.auth.models import user. Then we have imported everything we need. And now I want to use this sync to async we have imported earlier. So at the bottom of these methods, I can add this decorator at sync to async. This makes it possible to store things in the database while we use this await. So we store and we wait till it's finished. And then def, because this is not the asynchronous view, this is a synchronous view. Save message, self, username, room, message. I want to pass in all of these variables. And then, since we now have the username, I want to get the user object from the database by saying user equals user dot objects dot get, where username equals username. So we get the user based on what we send from the front end. And I also want to get the room by saying room equals room dot objects dot get, where slug equals room, since the slug is what we pass in the front end. And then we can create a new message object by saying message.objects.create. We say user equals user, so it's connected to the user, and we can connect it to the room. Now we set content equals message, which we get there. So now that we have this function for storing messages, we need to call it by scrolling up a little bit. So before it's sent to the group, we can store it in the database by saying await self.saveMessage, pass in username, the room, and the message, like that. So when we now use await, we wait for this synchronous view to finish before it continues to sending it back to this chat rooms. So we can try this now by saying hi, submit. So if I refresh now, it's still here. Great. And if I go here now, I refresh in a different browser, I can try to send hello back from admin. And now it appeared here as well. Perfect. So now I can set this task here as well to done. And the problem you can see now for the last task, which is that we need to scroll to the bottom, is that when you have very many messages here, the page will become very long. So I want to add a maximum height to this and automatically scroll to the bottom. So if I go now to the base.html file, I can add a little bit of styling here. We can say style and then dot chat messages. We can say height is 400 pixels and overflow y auto. So when it's more than 400 pixels, it will automatically start to scroll. So we can test this now. Yes, you can see here that I now can scroll the content, but I want to be able to be sent to the bottom automatically when we send messages. So if I go back to room.html again, so I can create a new JavaScript function for scrolling to the bottom, at the bottom of here. So function scroll to bottom, and then I want to get this element here called chat messages. I think I have it here as well. So I can copy this, and then I can say const object div equals document query selector, then I get this, and then object div dot scroll top equals object div dot scroll height. So this will now automatically scroll to the bottom. And I want to trigger this when we load the application. So copy and paste there. And I also want to call this when we get a message from the server. So load there, I can add it as well. So we can go back now and try this by refreshing. And then you see that we are automatically at the bottom. Try to send a message as well. Then you see that we got scrolled to the bottom. Perfect. It might not be ready for production, but with a few tweaks here and there, it most certainly can be used to anything you want. The most obvious thing to change is to implement PostgreSQL instead of SQLite and increase the security. If you want to learn even more about this subject, please check out my website codewithstein.com, where you can learn how to build a Slack clone using the same technology.